Um, okay. And we are recording. Hello, welcome everyone. It's been a little while since the episodes have been back here. So we are on episode 8 today. Life got in the way, so it was about a month or so that I didn't record. And I am here with my good friend, Adam Pines.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely. How's Thanksgiving?
It's good, man. It means a lot to be back here.
Yeah.
See old, familiar faces.
And you're in Philadelphia. Yes.
Right.
Okay. For a second, I got you confused with Bogdenford. I was not going to say
Yeah,
Tennessee.
fair.
How's the Philly life going?
I'm liking it out there. Philadelphia is kind of underratedly one of the most Midwestern East Coast cities, which is not saying very much, but I do think I'm adapting better there than I would in like New York or DC or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
How big is Philadelphia?
It's a good question. It's in the
Yeah.
top 10
Top
largest
10?
cities in
Okay.
the U.S. Doesn't say much.
I feel like Philadelphia is a city I don't think about too often. But
You're probably not the only person to say that.
yeah, I don't know. Other than the show, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Other than that, I really don't know much about it. But
Yeah, they had a pretty big run with Rocky, and they really drew that out for, 9 movies. But staying out of the national spotlight besides that and the occasional drunken Super Bowl parade.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah, I don't know much about Philadelphia, but I'm sure I'll learn more about it. But that's not why you were here today, to talk about Philadelphia and the city of
No
Philadelphia.
expert on that.
You're
Yes,
not
sir.
expert on that, but you are an expert.
Mm.
You're an expert. Well, you are practicing the expertise in your research on depression.
Yeah. I have been able to research depression a bit. It's hard to call yourself an expert when you're around people who have applied so many more decades to intensively researching this phenomenon, whatever you want to call it. But if you want to call it that for the sake of this episode, that's fine, as long as people know that I'm skeptical of applying that label to myself at the moment.
Okay, well, you're being too modest about that.
Maybe not. Thank you.
I guess you can never be an expert in 100% in anything. There's always unknowns, but you're getting there, and the research that you're doing is you have a vast and more knowledge than most people do. What exactly are you doing, and what's the program you're in at the moment?
Right. It's a neuroscience PhD program that includes a master's within it. But what you do in that is rotate around labs. It's kind of a nice feature of neuroscience programs, is you get a little bit more exposure to different areas of research, partially because it's a more interdisciplinary field than others, but partially just because they like you to make sure you're going to be happy in the dissertation lab you end up in. So at this point in the program, I've chosen a dissertation lab, but I haven't chosen my dissertation yet. That happens before the end of the school year. So next spring, I'll have that all worked out.
Gotcha. Wait, are you in your master's or going into, what exactly is your master's, right?
I'll get a master's after this year.
After
and
this
then
year.
there's a PhD portion after that. That's intimidatingly indefinite in terms of how long it is. But 6.3 on average for everything, year and a half in. Usually people who do human neuroimaging get out a little bit quicker, since we don't have to train monkeys for a year and a half at a task every time we want to ask a question. So in a position to not spend. We'll see. Actually, I don't want to jinx anything there.
I have confidence in you. You'll be good. But what was your path leading up to the research and what you're doing now? So undergrad, grad, and everything.
It's a good question, because it was a little less linear than others who are in neuroscience at the moment, I suppose. When I was going into college, I pretty much knew I wanted to do something studying the human mind originally, and still to a large degree now that manifested itself as psychology, right? A lot of people are very interested in psychology, and most universities offer a good exposure to that. Psychology major is incredibly common across the U.S., so that's kind of the path that I took. And then I got into a research lab there that wasn't doing the type of work I'm doing now, but was really community-based psychology is the name for that field. And that was in Los Angeles, so we'd spend a lot of time researching different pieces of demographic data, legislation, and recidivism programs, anti-drug programs, anti-alcohol programs in underprivileged areas in Los Angeles. And there's a lot of those, as you can imagine. So that was a pretty good exposure to just the depth of what psychological conditions can do on a population scale, as opposed to an individual, more psychiatry-based approach. and also exposure to just how much help people need out there that research could potentially benefit. But it did require some type of transition to be able to make it into the human brain instead of the human mind, maybe is one way to look at it. So after I finished up there, there was a postdoc who really went out of his way to give me quite a bit of guidance. And his work is more community level interventions. Actually, his research was cited in a piece of legislation in the Los Angeles area to put further restrictions on tobacco shops because they showed a lot of crime related to those tobacco shops, and ultimately they were able to put a little more control on them for the betterment of those neighborhoods. So what he told me was essentially I needed to get a research coordinator position in a slightly different field that's more in tune with neuroscience, since those were the programs I wanted to go into, but it wasn't available at the undergrad institution I went to. So I probably emailed 50, 60 professors all over this country, a few in Canada, a few in England, just to try and see if there are any research coordinator positions out there. That's like a research assistant, and in a non-esoteric language, that was kind of like a lab lackey, right? You have the PI, the professor at the top of the food chain, then you have research scientists, then you have postdocs, then you have grad students, then you have research coordinators, and then you have research assistants, then you have research volunteers, which is the position I first got. I was lucky to actually get some very good exposure there, and I was lucky that it was a short period of time. So I moved to the Bay Area to go volunteer for this guy. I had my personal trainer certification, so I was doing that at the same time. And both of those things helped me get my research coordinator job at the PAN lab at Stanford. They were able to bring me on as a research coordinator for a depression and obesity study, which both related to the volunteer work I was doing, which was a lot of transcranial magnetic stimulation and MRI scans, fMRI scans.
Transcranial stimulation?
Yeah, that's really interesting. You'd like that as an engineering guy. They take two strong magnets and they induce electrical currents on the other side of the skull non-invasively. And you can do different types of transcranial magnetic stimulation, which can be both inhibitory or excitatory to the cortex. And what you do is take a scan of the patient, so you have the exact mapping of their cortex and their skull and everything. You use infrared cameras to exactly line up where their head is in 3D space. You put another sensor on the coil, the transcranial magnetic stimulator, and you're able to very precisely get to very specific parts of the patient's cortex with kind of a amount of precision that's not often seen in psychiatry, not seen in other contexts that I can think of at least. So I was doing that for a bit, and that was pretty cool. But ultimately I was more on the examination side, doing MRIs and taking MRI scans for most of my time as a coordinator. Then I applied to grad programs after that. UPenn was a really good fit for me for a lot of reasons. They were hoodwinked into accepting me, and I've been able to work there since then.
Wow. Hold on. I'm going to move. I am going to Joe Rogan it and position your mic
a little bit closer.
No. I'm going to move it away because you're very close to the table. So in case anyone hasn't noticed, I'm not at the normal apartment, at Matt Zafe's apartment. He's gone on family vacation at the moment. So I had to do this in my living room, and we kind of have a fire going, kind of set the mood. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of warm, nice, relaxing environment. So I'm sure I didn't really introduce that at all. I kind of just went right into that. I wasn't thinking there. But in case anyone noticed that we're not in the normal place, that's why. Sorry, I totally cut you off. I just noticed there's some pops going on. So
that was about the end of the immediate story anyway.
The immediate? Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, sorry about that.
No
so going from doing the examination side of research, you were in the Bay Area, Stanford, correct? Yeah, you're at Stanford. What was at the end of this study, or at the end of the research there, what were the findings that you had?
It's interesting. They just finished data acquisition about a month ago.
Oh.
It's a very long study for several reasons. First of all, anytime you have to scan hundreds of people, there's quite a bit of logistics involved, especially patient populations, because you have to get their primary care providers to essentially agree that this is a good idea, and you have to have those institutions coordinate with the research institution. But this was also a longitudinal study, so they were all exposed to an experimental intervention for both depression and obesity. Usually they're treated separately. This treated them together, and they underwent that for 2 years. So they're getting follow-up scans the whole time.
Were the reason they were doing that together was the correlation between they find with?
That's one way. That's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean,
obesity
people.
And depression.
Yeah, people don't like to use the word correlation all the time in science. At the moment, there's some seedy statistics that have been going on with that.
Correlation does not always equal causation.
Right, that's the main problem. But yeah they're intertwined very deeply, and part of the reason that people wanted to treat them combined was because of their combined nature. Exactly.
Well, how would that just be exercise? Like, I don't know what else to say about that.
No, yeah. So you're saying like there's only so many treatments that treat both depression and obesity. So what is the union of those?
I guess what is the union? I mean, yeah, like I guess boiling down to like a reductionist view of it would be lose weight, feel better. That's what you'd think, but obviously that may not be the case.
I mean, recommended exercise was part of it. They all got these like what are these? Those like wearables that count your steps.
Fitbits.
Yeah,
right?
Fitbits. Okay. Yeah. So they all got those, and they were encouraged to do steps. They have like a life coach for dietary choices and stuff like that. And it's also like through a primary care institution too, right? So these people are getting depression treatment in addition to having these types of things recommended. There's also emotional regulation strategies that come into that, and you could actually imagine that self-regulation has quite a bit to do with depression and obesity. So that tended to be one of the cognitive constructs that they were targeting with those interventions.
Self-regulation.
Right.
What do you mean by self-regulation?
They tended to frame it as cognitive self-regulation, and I can explain any of these further.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know what those two words mean, but not together. As in the circumstance of what we're talking about with your study.
Yeah, and it does mean a different thing depending on who you're spinning it to. So the three were cognitive self-regulation, emotional self-regulation, and something like self-reflective regulation, which was more loosely tied down than the others. But they had different modalities for examining each of these domains, which is kind of a cool way to think about it, because you're increasing the validity of what you're measuring if you can demonstrate that what you're measuring is consistent across different ways that you're measuring it. That's a super abstract sentence. Let me just explain that a little further so it's concrete.
Yeah, I'm assuming, just the more ways you can test it and come out with the same results, that means there's validity between them.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So for emotional regulation, we would show them these terrible pictures that are widely used in psychological research to probe emotional regulation and emotional reactivity. And then there's like cute puppies, shit like that mixed in there just to like get the positive side of emotional induction and see what that looks like. So we do that in the scanner. You can look at how their brain's reacting to that, or you can analyze the bold signal, the blood oxygen level dependent signal from different parts of their brain while they're doing that. And then I've made these...
Is that where that electromagnetic comes in? You can see the blood oxygen levels? Or?
Yes, that's... so that's the beauty of an fMRI, is that you can be sensitive to that. And that's really led to the proliferation of the field that I find myself in.
And then whole swaths of different uses you could use for it.
So people certainly do. There's a lot of studies that you can do with that. And just now people are starting to get their shit together with getting these large public data sets and making them applicable enough across questions, as opposed to just, spending $80,000 getting 20 people scanned for your one psychology task and then throwing out the results if they're not there and wasting that. But yeah, the fMRI has certainly been a big deal for at least what's led to the development of research.
Gotcha. So you going back to three types of self-regulation you had.
Yeah.
That's what happens, by the way, on this. Sometimes we just tangents go off on topics. So yeah, self-regulation with exercise. Like actually, go on. If you were explaining more, I was about to go on a tangent. So
yeah, well, I'll just try and wrap up what I was saying earlier. So, for example, in emotional regulation, we have those pictures that we show them in the scanner, and we're able to get one measurement of emotional regulation there. I pulled a lot of 360 videos, and we'd throw them in an Oculus Rift for them outside of the scanner, and we'd have them self-report emotional reactivity to that. Then we also had some metrics like head movement, head acceleration, stuff like that we could use as a proxy for components of emotional regulation. And then there was a passive sampling component involved, which was the third domain, where we had an app on their smartphone that does what's called ecological momentary assessment, which is really growing in psychology. So stuff like word histograms, which doesn't trace the syntax of their sentences. You don't save the sentences, but you do save the frequency of words that they use. And this actually does, as far as smartphone metrics go, a decent job of indicating like how someone is feeling emotionally.
And I remember a couple years ago when you were talking about this, that you could possibly detect through texts and through language certain words that are used more often, or keywords, and kind of figure out with a certain degree of certainty if someone is falling on, a bad day or depression or depressive symptoms or happier and everything. And I found that fascinating.
Yeah, just I'm probably going to do a lot of like, what's the word that they use? You want to, yeah, I'm probably going to make a lot of conclusions less strongly than perhaps I've in the past for the sake of not overstating any of the evidence at the moment. But you could say things about someone, but this isn't being used like as a primary method of evaluating someone's depression at the moment. It's typically like a very far research side tool as opposed to clinical tool, though people are trying to change that. Gotcha. Sorry to interrupt though.
Oh, no, that's fascinating. And what was it? Looking at Facebook, Google searches,
yeah,
are everything. So Facebook does a lot of metrics on their own internal like psychology of people, and I think Facebook got in trouble a little bit. They're like kind of doing tests where they would show certain statuses, like a bad status, and see if that affected people. But it'd be interesting, almost in a way. I mean, you'd be going to private data, but like you said with your research, spending $80,000, getting 20 patients, testing them, and then seeing you might have data points that are completely out of it, and be like, okay, we can't use that one person, that one data point. You can't use this because of that, or there's lots of things that can affect your research. And especially like with all the data that's out there, imagine, so Facebook, we already know, has done metrics and done studies on their own customers, us.
Yeah.
Imagine if they could open that up, all of that raw data, to analysts and to psychologists.
Yeah.
You would be able to tell so much more about society. Yeah. Instead of having someone come in for a trial, 80 people, 100 people, 20 people, whatever. Imagine if you could look at, just take about 1,000 people. That's what you need to get pretty decent
Depends
data.
on the question, but yeah, 1,000's a pretty good sample.
1,000's a pretty good sample. Imagine if you could take 1,000 people and look at their it's a terrible thing to say. Look at their conversations, or at least just analyze their Facebook statuses or Twitter statuses, and then look at what's going on in the world and see how big social events affect people, and then look at the data which said taking keywords or certain expressive emotions, and you could tell how things affect everyone at mass scales.
Yep.
And that would be the best way. But of course, these are private, gold public, but they keep that data private.
Yeah, there's some research that still goes on it. Not so much with Facebook, but you bring up Twitter. There's some high-profile papers that have come out with Twitter data that I'm not at the memorative capacity to summarize for you right now, but I can send your way later. There are people looking into this that can find very interesting things.
Here's the thing. You can say whatever you want with confidence.
Nice.
And no one knows. That's what podcasting's for.
It's a life skill too, right there.
It is. Hey, yeah. Fake it till you make it. No, but I mean, you obviously, you don't have to talk to it with detail, but I'm sure you know the gist to be able to explain like what these big papers have found.
Yeah, so it's language trends. It's the types of things you're talking about right now, where you just analyze linguistic patterns and you're able to find regional trends in them.
Yeah. That'd be interesting if you can open that up to the public, or at least universities.
Yeah.
And really, and it's so bad to say, but like private data, like you would be able to tell so much more.
Yeah.
Which obviously we're not going to do. That would open up a whole can of worms of terrible things. But I find that interesting that you can look through people's messages or see regional patterns with events and correlate that.
Yeah, that's a booming field, data science on social media.
And then I wanted to get back to your research with exercise or obesity and depression.
Mm-hmm.
From that, how important, with, you said that, that you track people's steps, you track people's, I'm assuming some exercise pattern.
Yeah, I mean, our side of the study was more limited to the phone, MRI scans, and the VR stuff. But then our partners at the health institution that they were recommended from were tracking all of that. Absolutely.
Did they find a correlation between higher or exercise rates and lower rates of depression, or feeling better with a given circumstances?
I'm sure that's come up in preliminary data. The full results of the study really have probably years before they're fully taken out, especially now that they're trying to integrate these new metrics. But the intervention did look effective.
Yeah.
And I guess that's not terribly surprising to me that if someone is posting comorbidities, if they have multiple conditions, and you treat those comorbidities instead of treating one of them, they'll get more better. But it does look like they're able to do that. I think it's just a question of how you scale that up from there, not like, does this approach make sense?
Gotcha. I always, for me, exercising is like my crutch, and I'm sure it's lots of people's, but
Yeah.
I every time, like, I see so many people that are like, I don't see lots of people, but I've just noticed, like, for me, and I hear a lot of people who are depressed and they're down, like people our age, people I've talked to, and I'm like, what are you doing for that? And like, they're going out drinking, they're working, and like the biggest thing I found with a lot of people, there's like, I don't want to run, I don't like going to the gym. I'm like, I think if so many people started going to the gym more, not that not that this is like some huge, saying that everyone needs to go to the gym, but it definitely helps. I think there's a huge correlation between working out and feeling way better. Self-esteem, endorphins, everything.
I think it's hard to make an argument against that it helps. A reason for hesitation there is only because of people with less responsive forms of depression, let's say treatment-resistant depression. There's not a whole lot of evidence to show they're experiencing the same type of swings that a person without their condition is. So what works for me and what has worked for me is exercise to, keep my mood more where I want it. But I don't really have a good reason to suspect that would work for everybody, at least to the same extent. But the fact that it works is, like, at least for some people, a lot of the time, it's pretty hard to argue with, for sure.
What do you think? This is a question I was going to ask you, and I've just thought about this. So, and it's no surprise right now. It just feels like, with our current political state, media, social media, the way we get news so much faster, and it just feels like our society overall is regressing to kind of back to a stage where there's a lot more. It just seems like everything, the world's just in a worse place right now, and it seems like everyone we talk to, like a lot of people I talk to, it's like everyone's just kind of depressed. We're like, we aren't functioning fully as a society. And sorry about the jingles of Gizmo in the corner, my little dog. And so, I forgot where I was going with this. Looking at all that, before, so if we go back, I totally lost track of where I was going. I totally got distracted by the dog.
He's very cute.
He is very cute. Gizmo. How dare you? He's just staring at all these lights. He has no clue what's going on. Basically with that, where, like, as a society, what do you think, like, if you have you done any research with, like, knowing, have you seen any trends with, like, what would, like, kind of help that? Or with your research, you're working out, have you seen anything with social media, like people trying to stave away from social media, or like, basically, what have you seen with?
You're asking what would help with modernity-induced depression?
Yes.
It's a hard question. I think it's hard because framing the problem is hard. Like, what is modernity-induced depression? What type of depressive symptomology is unique to our day and age that isn't just a repetition of some historical cycle? But when you talk about social media, there's certainly research out there to suggest that you're more depressed if you spend more time on social media. It's correlative, but it's at least there that if you use social media a lot, you're more likely to be depressed. I think there's probably more out there for, like, Instagram and stuff that really heightens social comparison. And probably more so for, vulnerable populations in that. Like, I know, like, body image projections are worse for women with the current state of a lot of social media. So I can't speak to gender differences in particular, but there is evidence out there to suggest that using less social media will make you a happier person. But beyond that, I guess I'm not sure exactly what you're suggesting is causing these problems.
Yeah. An interesting thing to think of. What do you think? So, with depression, being could be chemical imbalance. What do you think depression looked like? This is just kind of like a off-topic question, but what do you think depression looked like 10,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Do you think there was as much of that? And I guess this is kind of where I was thinking. Okay, now I kind of remember where my question was thinking. 10,000 years ago, when we didn't have obviously phones. We had nothing else other than kind of hunter-gatherer survival events to deal with. Like, you got to run away from the tiger, you got to run away from the bear, you got to find that next meal. And it's interesting to think about, like, what was even language, what was like communicative skills back then. Like, do you think that it was like even an occurrence like back then when it was like small societies and stuff, like depression? Do you think that was like a thing, or do you think that existed, or has society transformed us over the last 300 years or more, putting us into these systems, communities with axioms that we all have to live by? We just don't feel as free in a sense. Like, do you think that actually like occurred 10,000 years ago? People, I don't know, like rah rah in the cave, he said he is not going and hunting. Like, do you think that even
that's exactly
happened?
how it went down.
That's exactly what happened.
I think they found that cave painting. Some dude wrote that on the wall.
Yeah,
pretty spot on.
He said.
It's hard to talk definitively about anything that's prehistory before we have like a lot of recorded documentation, but there are hints of this in things that are evolutionarily conserved, right? So if you find, for example, demographic differences in suicide, and suicide maybe isn't completely equitable to depression, but is more concrete.
I would say there's
there's an overlap for sure.
Yeah.
But whether or not they're the same thing is a different question. Sometimes there's more of like an OCD, like inability to control compulsions, that's related to suicide, and people look at it from more of that angle than I'm at the bottom of the barrel, I'm just going to kill myself.
Or having depressive like grief symptoms, whereas like you lose a wife, or you lose your job, lose everything, and it's more of a instantaneous acute event that brings to that, versus being depressed for years and years and finally saying I've had enough. So I think that's what so if you look at suicide as something that's an evolutionarily conserved element of depressive behavior, the fact that that varies across ethnic groups, between genders, somewhat implies that it is evolved into us differently, meaning that there would have been some type of, bifurcation or split of depression or suicide related behavior back when these traits were evolving in, unless we believe that these are all picked up in the modern world, the post-agricultural revolution world or something like that. And I think the traditional models of evolution would suggest that things that are that ingrained are not picked up over 1,000 years, 2,000 years. So to me, that suggests that there is some sort of deeper rooting of these conditions than what we can attribute to modern society. Yeah.
Does that make sense? I don't know if I explained that well.
Kind of just evolutionary. Like, it seems that there's something deeper, that it's always been there. We've always dealt with depression. Do you think there's any mechanism as to why depression shows up in humans and throughout time? Is there some weird biological or evolutionary like mechanisms to why that's there? Is it to safeguard certain people, or
there's theories, but you can't really say anything about it definitively. There's some like evolutionary behaviors that people can make a very good theory for, that you totally believe. People have tried that with like the paleo diet, for example. Mm-hmm. That's why it's called the paleo diet. But it's certainly very speculative to go into mood disorder evolutionary range. One thing that people will put out is it could be like a conservation of resources thing in the winter. You sleep more when you're depressed. You don't move as much. You get more depressed when it's darker out in the winter. People get this a lot more often. So maybe some type of way that you could sleep through the winter and pseudo-hibernate would have been some adaptive purpose of depression in more winter-prone ancient climates. But again, it's all speculative, so it's hard to say anything super informative.
Yeah. I mean, that's always interesting because, I've dealt with depression over time, and, like, it's kind of like one of those things, like, is that just, like, a weird fluke in my brain? Like, and if that happened 10,000 years ago to people, like, what is that, just some weird evolutionary fluke, something that just goes wrong and you don't, your inhibitors don't, give out as much serotonin, or like, what is that? And I've always just thought about that, like, why does that exist? Or like, why does anything? Why does a personality? Why do we have personalities? Is that like, did our brain just over time create these personalities to give us the goal of living and then keep on going? Yet if you our personality makes us, protect ourselves, or we are very, soft, humans compared to other animals. So
Certainly.
we want to connect with other people, and we have power in numbers. But then you go down to, just the biological level of a cell or anything. It's like, why does a cell want to live?
Yeah.
Why does a cell want to keep going? It'll fight off things like an amoeba, or you look at it as like a cellular level. Then just, bring that all the way up to us.
Yeah.
We still want to live.
Well, what if you think about it from the perspective of the genes trying to propagate their own information and using us as a vessel? Right.
Yeah.
So why do the genes want to live is maybe like a way to just push that question further down. But if they didn't, they wouldn't have evolved this far in the evolutionary chain, right? Like anything that didn't have some type of insane drive for survival wouldn't have proliferated and dominated landscapes or oceanscapes, whatever.
Yeah. And that goes down to even like thinking before, like where life came from, just weird, what happened, some weird chemical reaction where there's amino acid chains replicating over and over until some weird part where somehow a cell wall came about, or bringing it down to that view is just it is weird that, like, why do we have that will to survive? And we have that, yet there are some weird mechanisms in our head, like depression, that kind of
call that into question.
Yeah.
And what if you think of survival as a group mechanism? If you think of a tribe or a unit of evolutionary information, a unit of common genetic information trying to propagate itself instead of the individual human, that would explain stuff like people being willing to die for their countries, right? For people who are genetically similar to them. I mean, how many people wouldn't take a bullet for someone in their family? Probably most people would, right? Like, It's a very commonly accepted thing to defend your genetic information and not necessarily yourself as an organism. And you see this in religions too, right? And you could obviously make the argument that before lots of major world religions would have been synonymous with your cultural group, your ethnic group, your tribe, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it makes more sense when you frame that as the group trying to best survive, and maybe that explains why individuals can fluctuate in their mental health as long as the group comes out to a net positive.
Yeah. And overall, yeah, I agree. Overall, that is where people in society are. Not everyone is dealing with depression. It's like 1 in 10, 1 in 15 adults. I looked up some stuff before. It's like 1 in 15 adults deal with like clinical depression. It's like 1 in 6 adults at some point, or like any time in their life, or like something at one point will deal with depression. 1 in 3 women deal with depression, which women deal with it more.
Absolutely.
I don't exactly know why that happens, but it seems like that happens a lot, and that makes sense that having a net positive. And I wonder if evolutionary wise, I'm just like thinking now, like our brains, we started getting more folds and started to think more, and our brains we started expanding more, our frontal cortex and everything. We started to be able to have more complex thoughts, and I wonder if that's like a weird evolutionary mechanism was to why we started going into groups and stuff just to help each other out. And that could be definitely something.
So you're saying our unique pattern of brain development that's kind of innate to our branch of Homo sapiens or whatever is like the reason for our social behavior.
Yeah,
they're certainly very closely intertwined at the very least, right?
Yeah, no, it's we could go into like hours talking about that. It's just a weird topic of basically just coming back to where we came from and why we're here. That is interesting that that's something that happens in our society. When you think over evolutionary time, it's like things would like be moved out, but or be worked out of the brain, having dominant genetics and people who are happier that might live on more. But I don't know.
Are people who are happier more likely to propagate their own genes through additional organisms, though?
I don't know.
There's a lot of people who are really happy without kids, is
true.
My only first thought. And there's a lot of societies that were very happy before industrialization came into their country. So the most genetically successful group is not often the one with all the kinks worked out in their brain.
Yeah. And you need variation to keep going on. Yeah. I mean, if everyone was happy, I guess people wouldn't get shit done.
Yeah.
We just have like a renaissance.
Unfortunately.
We just have a renaissance of people doing art, doing whatever. But yeah, everyone does have to barrel down sometimes and just do their work. But yeah, I don't know. That is part of life.
Yeah.
Just dealing with that.
And there's a lot of like inherent flaws and hits that our quality of life takes because of the complexity that we're able to carry with us in our brains, right? Like you don't see really epilepsy in other species. You certainly don't see as much suicidal behavior, as much as I'm aware. People like bring up lemmings. I don't really know what's going on there. I hear they like fall off cliffs sometimes, so it's hard to tell if it's intentional. But
that was my next question for you. It's like in your research, I know you've read, I'm sure, a lot more than most people. Do we see that in animals? Similar depressive symptoms, and if we do, how do they manifest themselves versus us?
So they do a lot of depression studies in mice because there's absolutely terrible things that you can do to mice that you can't do to humans, obviously. And I mean, it's bad, but it's to answer important questions.
True,
right?
Yeah.
If we want to get past our current model of treating these conditions, we have to do some animal level research and know what the hell's going on in the brain. So for those, common paradigm is maternal deprivation. They'll take like pups, little baby mice, away from their mothers, and that's a traumatizing event, and that induces depression. There's learned helplessness is a big one. Martin Seligman kind of coined that back in the day, and that's where they just kind of make you feel like you have no power over your current environment. You being a mouse, not a human in this situation. Yeah. So like they'll just give random shocks to your cage or something like that, and you think you have no control over it because you don't. You're a mouse, and there's no way of predicting these shocks, and that can induce animal levels of depression that they measure through anhedonia, primarily, as far as I understand. Like if they start to lose their preference for very basic mouse pleasures like sugar water and stuff like that, that's taken as a sign of depression. And it looks like I don't have any reason to believe that that's an inadequate model. Like it's not the same as human depression, but I don't have a reason to believe that it's completely distinct from what people go through.
Yeah. That's interesting.
There's some cool stuff that comes out of those studies too. One of my favorite things over the past year was a mouse study of depression.
Mouse study of depression.
Yeah.
It's really sad.
Yeah.
They're so cute and small. Yet we can just destroy their worlds for our own research.
Yeah, it's a lot of power. But
that is weird, the ethical dilemma of like studying other animals. It's just like they're at a small or a lesser stage of evolutionary development, and there's no other way.
Yeah, and at the same time, like I've done much, much worse things to the animal kingdom through my diet than anyone I know working on animals ever will. Like the stuff that happens in slaughterhouses and the whole meat industry that goes for me to have my like 3 kinds of meat in my breakfast, like in one meal. It's ridiculous. So it's hard to like look down upon that in any way, since we're all pretty complicit in this animal torture system we have going. Yeah.
No, that's I used to be like a huge anti-hunting and everything. Like personally, I just wouldn't hunt. I don't know if I could go out and like kill a deer or anything, or a moose or whatever.
Yeah.
But I used to be like totally against that, but now knowing, not, like in the last few years, I'm like, same thing, looking at my breakfast, looking at my diet and everything, I'm like, I can't be a hypocritical and tell someone not to hunt.
Yeah, right. Hunting's probably better, if anything,
it's
right?
more humane, absolutely. Yeah, no. And a lot of people don't like realize that. Like, that we literally just have an industry of murdering a lot of animals at a huge mass scale that I don't even know how to fathom. Just looking at how many pounds, thousands and thousands of pounds of meat are in every single store, and then there's 1,000 different of those stores in one city, and then you sit there and you just extrapolate that to the entire country and the world. You're just like, we do a lot of murdering.
Yeah,
we naturally do a lot of, like, I don't know, that's also another weird natural trait of humans, like violence. That is something we glorify.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's not like other animals aren't violent, but they don't engage in like certainly like attaching the same heroicism to it that we seem to, and the same romanticism to it that we seem to.
Yeah.
But part of that is because of the types of group dynamics that we've been able to generate with our whatever brains, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah. It's sad. It's weird.
Meat is, but it's really good. It's ultimately what it always comes down to.
I mean, meat has a lot of protein.
It's like generally it seems like it's good for you.
Generally,
Unfortunately,
for the most part, yeah.
Like if you're not eating hot dogs, like stuff like that's probably, in my opinion, behind a lot of the studies correlating like red meat and cancer. So those people like who eat hamburgers are more likely to eat like hot dogs and have like potato salad with it and all this weird.
And I remember a lot of those studies too. There's a study I saw. It was big like 2 years ago. It was like, saying red meat causes cancer and is terrible for your health. And what that study didn't show is like, yeah, if you're eating cheeseburgers and fries and everything, that's not going to be good for you. But if you eat a nice cut of like lean steak, with vegetables, and you're getting exercise and sleep, there's nothing to say that meat's bad for you.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people out there who are very vehemently in their camps on both sides,
yes.
right? Like diet's almost like a religion at this point, with not quite like the documentation that we provided for it, but the amount of intensity that people feel without being super informed on either side about it in the general population, how at the throats of others they're willing to get.
And that's just toxic tribalism.
Yeah,
we like taking one side, one camp, them versus us, and
it's the thing to do.
It is the thing to do, especially in our social and political climate today.
It's a lot.
I let the fire go out. Oh no. Should I get up and stoke it really quick?
Throw that other log on.
Throw the other log on. Go for it. Get it up going there. And then next thing I'll bring up too is the current research that you're doing in Philadelphia.
Yeah, right.
That'll catch. Ooh, I'm surprised you touched that one.
Got a lot of fire touching in my history.
That one, that was a hot one too. It's like burn. Yeah, I'm impressed that you touched that. I would not have done that. It's fire walking. Walk on the coals and embers. Yeah, that is interesting. That it sucks that the meat industry is so big, and but yeah, that's something we have to go on and. Yeah.
I think transparency is really the only way we'll address that. There's that gag rule now in slaughterhouses where you can't film the inside of them. If you slap like most Americans in like a VR helmet on the inside of a terrible things in the slaughterhouse, you'd see some more realism imbued in where people think their food is coming from and the adjusted declines in meat. Or you have like some really cute Disney princess that's a cow or something, and she just gets like brutally slaughtered. Whatever it takes to emotionally engage people. We have the technology to do that.
The thing is, though, there's no way we can change that.
You don't think so?
We'll change what the slaughterhouses and
the gag rule you're talking about.
Oh no, the gag rule. Sorry, no. I was just saying like at a mass scale, there's no way we can change our industry.
You don't think so?
So I've thought about like what you would have to change all of society. Whereas, well, number one, if everyone went vegetarian, that just means we'd have to use a lot more water for agriculture. That's going to affect the environment in a different way. Where we're going to get all that water from?
I haven't heard that, but it sounds like you've looked into this more than I have.
It's not like I'm I know all this research and I'm like a staunch like supporter of that. But if you switch the industry from like meats and go a lot harder in agricultural, you're gonna start taking material from the environment somewhere else, and that'll be a lot of water. So there's no win or lose with that. Also, with society, we have 300 million people. So if we did like smaller farms or communal farms and stuff in areas like this, do you think there would be, number one, do you think we could have the quantity of meat that would be possible to sustain
through smaller farms?
Through smaller farms and these communal things, and like then we'd have to break society up into smaller neighborhoods where you had your chicken coop and like all those things. I don't know if we'd be able to do that on a mass scale.
I mean, certainly not with the type of drastic speed that it seems like you're envisioning.
Yeah, no. And also just we would have to change how society works. I mean, we have so many people, so many jobs with fast food or everything like that. And then people are busy. They have kids. They just need to get food quick. You run to the store, you get that meat, or you go to McDonald's and get some, dinner or something like that. The way our society works is we're a very, quick, fast, hardworking, long-hour system.
Yeah.
We'd have to change the way unless we went to Sweden or Italy, where everyone just goes and gets coffee for 2 hours in the morning before work, and it's a much slower society.
Or Spain, or most of the world.
Most
honestly,
of the world,
right?
yeah. Yeah, no. I mean, there definitely is an argument like we aren't like that unique. We have a huge country. We have a big population. But if you look at our population compared to density of other countries, like we're pretty spread out. We have room. We have room to do.
We have
that.
all of Alaska. Got a lot of room up there.
Yeah, we have a lot of room up there. Though I think with depression stuff, just being in a permanent winter state probably wouldn't help.
Yeah, that'd be interesting to research seasonal affective disorder up there. You'd think there'd be a lot of people that could benefit from research into that specific type of mood disorder effect.
I didn't even think about that with like seasonal depression and living in those colder climates. Is that just something that like over time that people have just dealt with and just deal with it and live their lives?
I think there may be higher suicide rates up there, and I think it's definitely a struggle for people, but that's about all I can imagine about that. I mean, I know like they had those UV lights. I don't know if that's still like commonly prescribed to people, where you would like try and get artificial sunshine or something. People take vitamin D to try and help with that, but it's certainly more of an issue in places with less sunlight.
I didn't know that they did UV lights.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that in like a psychology textbook that was probably printed in like somewhere in Texas, where they've never like encountered short days in the winter and don't know the therapy, but people at least did it. It was a thing.
Interesting. Oh, okay. I never heard of that. Getting all that vitamin D. Yeah. Sometimes I don't understand why I live here in Chicago, especially when you go visit somewhere else like California. Like I bet you were just off every day in the Bay. You were just like, this is nice.
Yeah, it's mostly the national parks and the mountains out there that I really dug. Just being able to drive like 3 hours and get to the Sierra Nevadas, which are the greatest in some ways. Like they're supposed to have the best weather for that elevation out of anywhere in the world. In some parts of them, lots of good stuff in the mountains there. But the 100-degree August and the 90-degree heat lasting into October in Los Angeles, that type of stuff I wasn't quite as big on, but very nice weather system for the most part out there. Yeah, if weather's your thing, then living in the Midwest probably isn't.
Yeah, and being in warm climates and going hiking and stuff, there's something like primal about that like absolutely helps.
Oh yeah.
When you're out of, an entire city or the suburbs or wherever else, and you go out into the mountains, you're just like, like there's something you can like romanticize about like just getting this log cabin, leaving everything behind, just living there with the means of the land. There's something about that.
How many times a week do you think of that? So it's like every day for me.
I think about that a lot. Like I've definitely like when I was like out in Arizona, before I started work and stuff, I was out in the mountains. I'm like, if I just did this once a month, I would feel so much better. And then, you do romanticize about just a cabin, you and like some people up there just living the land. Like, each person's like half a mile apart. You have your entire land, just you have some friends around. But then there's a part of me too, it's like, I don't think I could leave behind. Like, me as a car nut, I like leave behind my dream and goal of getting a Lamborghini or something like that, or having a big house, nice cameras, TVs, phones. Like me as a tech nerd, I love that.
You wouldn't just want like a 300 horsepower ATV.
I would a 300 horsepower ATV. Most ATVs have like 25 horsepower.
Yeah, sounds about right.
You'd kill yourself. No, I mean, definitely I could live like that, but I don't know if I'd be able to leave everything behind. I feel like I've just been molded into kind of this system.
Yeah, I mean, familial and friend connections are no small potatoes. That's what we structure our life around.
Yeah,
and it's rooted here, for better or worse.
But we do know you, and I'm sure you've heard people that do just kind of leave everything behind. Not everything, but they, they can go out and they have like a house somewhere in like Utah or Idaho, and like they're away.
Or Bozeman,
yeah, Montana, yeah, and that's just, I don't know. Would I be able to do that? I've always asked myself that. In the end, I don't know if I could completely just leave society.
It's not for most people.
Yeah.
But it's more doable now than ever.
But it's something we have done.
Yeah.
In history.
Yeah.
In the past, that's something humans have done. But, I don't know. Interesting. Just going back to the roots. The current research, I got a little off topic, that you're in now. So you went from Bay Area, Stanford, and now you are in...
I'm at UPenn.
UPenn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what does your research reside around there?
So the beginning of this, I said I have like a dissertation that I'll eventually have to decide and a PhD program very much like revolves around that once it's in place. But I do have like a preliminary project that I'm working on that's looking at what's called, the terminology at the moment is like microstructural properties, mostly of white matter in the brain, but trying to resolve different properties of tissue in the brain using diffusion imaging primarily at the moment, although that's likely going to expand to fMRI stuff down the road. Yeah. Right now it's kind of more preliminary methods that people aren't ready to like apply to individual scale, definitely, but even like large clinical populations. So there's more concrete effects, like development is a very traceable effect, and if you get people over a certain age range, you know there's going to be more salient detectable effects there than like trying to examine mood disorders, for example, or other conditions that are more observable psychologically than physiologically at the moment. So right now I'm looking at developmental effects on microstructural properties according to what my diffusion scans estimate and the models that I'm fitting estimate.
And I know you showed me, so with the research at the end, what is your hypothesis now, or your theory going in at the end? What are you guys looking for?
Yeah, this one is more of a methodology type of inquiry. So we're trying to determine which methodology is most sensitive to developmental effects, including, voxel by voxel. Voxel is a 3D pixel. That's what you use for 3D images. What effects, what diffusion methodology is most sensitive to effects there, but also on a network level. If you hear about the brain talked about in terms of networks, then a lot of those line up very well with developmental effects too on a population level. Gotcha. You have a large enough sample size, you can observe a lot of those things, and it looks like these diffusion methods are helpful for being more sensitive to those effects and starting to parse apart certain things, become more sensitive to certain types of effects. Okay,
and what do you mean by the diffusion levels?
So you can use different types of diffusion-weighted imaging. Specifically, what we use is called multi-shell diffusion imaging. You change the scanning parameters throughout the scan, so that way you have information from multiple kinds of scans, essentially, and you get varying responses from intracellular water versus extracellular water, depending on what your parameters are at. So when you assemble all of those together and try and fit all the pieces together, you can use patterns of water diffusion to estimate things like what percentage of a voxel is intracellular and what percentage of it is extracellular, or what is the orientation of axon bundles in the brain in this particular area, and how connected are they and how disconnected are they, stuff like that.
And this is based off of what you showed me a month ago or so. You had images of the brain in a certain way, and unfortunately we didn't plan. Maybe you can we could find like an image or something, kind of show what people what you're talking about. But from what I saw, that you could see certain symptoms or correlation or effects of if someone has certain brain disorder or depressed, and over time having your brain evolve and grow with those disorders. You said that your axons and stuff will all kind of align in certain directions, correct?
Yeah.
From the imagery I saw, you would see it all go in a certain direction in the small, tiny slices of the 3D image brain that you were doing.
Yeah. So I'm hesitant to use words like all align, because these methods are very aggregate level effect only sensitive. So the example that people like to give is like if you have compasses in a dryer or a washing machine, and you suddenly sample all of those, there's going to be a slightly larger proportion of them that are pointing north, but for the most part, they're going to be all jumbled around. So all we can really do is pick up on these massive group effects, relatively massive, compared to like what a single cell is doing in the brain, or a single synapse or a single channel. People get very, very fine detail on these systems. So I'm hesitant to say that anything that we're doing in the MRI world is anything more than massive aggregate effects that you're able to get. And sometimes these aggregate effects are enough to be able to differentiate between different types of conditions, to parse heterogeneity within conditions. And that's really where I am right now. So if that's what you're referring to, which I believe it is, that is true. You can detect differences within disorders using diffusion patterns and fMRI patterns, even structural patterns. If you just have static structural image of the brain, like what your doctor would use to see if you had a tumor or something like that. There's lots of properties you can delineate from that as well. So there's different modalities of MRI, and all of them have potential to parse different disorders and increase our understanding of heterogeneity within those disorders and similarities across disorders, all kinds of stuff.
Wow. And in the future, like big picture, with that imaging and what you're doing, what do you guys, the big picture of psychology and treatment, with those images, would you be able to, I guess, show that certain medications can help, or can you see the brain change over time? And is that kind of where their research is going, or the big picture research, maybe not specifically what you're doing, because you guys are doing the methodology of, can we use these images to show that, yes, these images show that people are depressed and maybe a certain medication will help over time, and we can visibly see that medication is doing something, or visibly see that person's changing over time, they're feeling better, and we can visibly show, hey, even their brain looks better in the sense that, like, before and after.
So all of those are correct, but there already is stuff out at the moment that can do a better job than just a DSM interview, let's say, on itself. For, one big one is telling people which type of SSRI they should take, because there's a lot of experimentation that goes on there, and it takes a long time to know if it's working or not, because there's a delay with that, and there's a lot of side effects associated with that. Sometimes it takes people 5 or 6 tries with a few weeks, months dedicated to each try to be able to figure it out, and they have to suffer through all the side effects at that point. There already is stuff using this technology where they're able to better predict what type of SSRI someone should take based on their brain data. And interestingly enough, on early life stress data too. So one of the studies that was really cool that came out of a previous lab where I was a coordinator, they were able to predict antidepressant treatment response based on amygdala reactivity. Mm-hmm. So the amygdala, or like, it's associated with, like, very heavily with emotion, I guess, let's say, at this point. So they looked at reactivity of that and combined it with their early life stress questionnaire. So that looks at childhood trauma, and that's very predictive of a lot of things beyond psychology, like lung disease, cancer, all this crazy stuff is associated with that. Yeah, that's one of the most powerful pieces of research I've read, the original early life stress paper out there, but we can get to that later as needed.
So that,
using that data.
Okay.
Yeah. Then they use that in the amygdala reactivity, and they're able to tell with a better idea who would respond to SSRIs, as opposed to the just frontline treatment is this pill. We're going to give you this first and see how it works, and you can check back in a few weeks. So we already do have the technology to do that to some degree, just not to the degree where you can make confident decisions on a patient-by-patient basis. These are group-level effects that are most of the time what's being demonstrated.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't know they already had that.
Yeah, I mean, in research. Very different than in the clinic. In the
clinical and applicable real world.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that they're applicable, but like, not going to be covered by an insurance program, for example. Not going to be part of primary care inquiry into your depression unless you come back multiple times and you have treatment-resistant depression. Those things usually don't get considered very heavily, and MRIs are expensive. So
they are,
especially in our healthcare system.
Yeah. So what exactly with treatment or non-treatable depression from treatment? In your research, have you shown that there's certain correlations between people why that happens, or is there some weird genetic fluke where the medications we have, SSRIs, do not work? Or is that like come from attribute from like really bad childhood trauma?
Right. You're spot on with that. The psychological research is much more compelling at the moment for what causes treatment-resistant depression. Mainly early life trauma is very hard for people to get past, understandably so, because it's the most... Yeah, don't need to get into that. I feel like that's obvious to most people, but it's a very formulative time period, and you're very sensitive to input from the environment. And if you don't get treated in a way that's conducive to your own growth, there can be elements of that are incredibly difficult to overcome later in life and can manifest themselves as mood disorders. On the neuroscience side, we do have, as far as I know, predictors of treatment-resistant depression versus non-treatment-resistant depression, but the psychological research is much more predictive of that at the moment, to my understanding. Just asking people, like, were you abused as a child, or this or that?
Yeah. Man. What got you into this
Right.
field of study. So you did psychology in your undergrad.
Yeah.
Did you know that you were going to go into this type of research? Did you have that in the future? Did something change over time, or what?
It was about my senior year when I realized I wanted to go into this type of neuroscience. And from that point, I was very geared towards, like I told you, that period where I was looking up just a bunch of professors researching this based off their papers and emailing them. But prior to that, my interest in psychology is probably more deeply rooted. I felt like it was a place where I could help people. And now I'm at a point where it's unclear if research that I'm doing will go towards helping people, but that's still the goal at this point.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to change policy through research, and it's a career-defining moment for people when that happens. But the original goal was to try and help people through a better understanding of the neurobiological mechanisms behind this, so we can start to treat it like it is. You know, if you get treated for anything in the hospital without some type of biometric, you'd call it into question, right? If you're taking heart medication, you would take some type of critical analysis of the heart using invasive or non-invasive techniques. So I think we're in a position where we can really move forward with the standard of care for mood disorders and things that we don't understand super well neurobiologically at the moment. And I wanted to be involved in that, and I thought I could help.
Yeah, and I mean, from what you've been telling me, I think that will help. I have no doubt that the research you're doing or part of the team will definitely help.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I mean, from what you've showed me, the images and what you've talked to me in the past and even right now, it seems that, yes, you're down the road being able to find more correlation between using the machines we have to find predictors or find visual and concrete evidence and seeing before and after and patterns that, yes, the research you're doing, I would say, will help down the line.
It's good to hear. It's really easy to get disconnected from anyone who's not in your immediate field of study in a PhD.
Yeah.
So the fact that someone who's not doing immediately what I'm doing thinks that, no small deal.
And yeah, no, I truly do. I truly do mean that. And I think anyone that's doing research in anything, I think in the grand scale, like, I think we should be throwing more money into research, even like really stupid things in research. You read about people who like study ants and like weird patterns of ants and like
ants do crazy shit though.
Ants do. I read a research thing recently about, you know, how if you take the biomass of ants, they outnumber, or they're just about number humans in the world. So if you took every human and you took every single ant, the ants would weigh the same, if not more.
I think more. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing too is like, you know, I don't know why I got into this, but it basically, it all does, you know, come together as in they looked at ants in like Africa, Asia, South America here, and they would just do studies of different ants, and they would, you know, have glass containers and look at the patterns in which they dig their holes and how they create their structures and systems. Right. And they find that why is an ant in South America and an ant that's in like northern China or in Canada or here, why are they all creating the same patterns?
Probably because it's efficient, huh?
Yeah.
My guess.
It's efficient. Now, is that something that if we go back to hundreds of millions of years when Pangea and everything separated, those same genetic epigenetic codes came apart? Or yes, over time, were they, you know, doing similar things, or were the patterns differently because soil could have been different back then? But over time, all those ants, they had some semblance of genetic code that they all started, you know, finding that they all evolved kind of at the same rate naturally in this world and finding similar patterns and making efficient holes or efficient nests. So it's like, was that genetically learned? Was that, you know, nature versus nurture, or nature then created nurture? And like just studying that in a way, you could extrapolate that to everything. They could extrapolate it to us, other animals, or look at even ants and how they like create their holes and create their structures. Like, that's really efficient. What if we take this to something else in research, like looking at how it's efficient? Same thing with bees and stuff. You know, they make their honeycomb, their hexagonal pattern, yet one of those patterns, there's always a pentagon. There's always a 5-side pattern.
I didn't know that.
So without hexagons, so if you try to make a perfect circle with hexagons,
you can't do it.
Huh. So it's like every 5th or 6th, like one on the outside has to be a pentagon to connect everything else. How the fuck did bees know how to do that?
Yeah, right. You seen like the waggle dance too, where they can like communicate to each other how far away a food source is and in what direction, just through a little dance. Yeah, bees are nuts, dude.
That's nuts. And or that they take pollen, and like bees themselves have like a negative kind of charge to them in the pollen, and it changes the pollen on the flowers, so a bee can already just go near it and they can feel that it's already been charged, like, oh, a bee's already been here, go to the next one.
Yeah.
So researching that, you can find out so many different methods. So the same thing with in the future, they did so much research to figure out, holy shit, that's how bees are doing that. They figure out which flowers. Let's say in the future, us dumb humans kill all the bees and climate change changes. How do we go and efficiently pollinate our flowers with little tiny robotic bees or something like that? Well, that's one way to do it. See if you can measure the charge on the flowers and know that each robot, if you give them AI, they'll go out and do it just like a bee does. But so it's for me with research, like kind of downplaying your research, saying, oh, I don't know if I'm going to change the world. Well, yes, you all have that little tiny part in what you're doing. Just like the person who's studying why an ant does what it does, or why the same patterns with like the guy who had a drop of coffee and dropped it onto like a table and saw how as it like evaporated the liquid, how on the outside like the coffee like granules would condense in a different way. He took that same algorithm and extrapolated it out. Now that's in like NASA and space, like
what?
Same. Yeah, this is a really crazy one. I forget the actual research, but I forget exactly how it attributed to space in research. But like, yeah, he looked at how like coffee stains on tables and how they melt, and like how like the surface tension of water will like bring the granules to the outside, and like that same thing research like went into space for a certain reason. I forget how they did that, but like researching all types of things will go into every single field, no matter how dumb you think like that research is.
Certainly a lot to learn from the world around us, especially in biological organisms that we don't fully understand.
Yeah,
a lot going on there.
Yeah, the ant one is one I read recently, and I was just like, why are ants doing all the same things all over the world? How did that happen? Like, yeah, I don't know. Is that something that was just learned and it was just in their code, and they just all seem to figure it out over time, even though obviously the ants in South Africa and the ones in Asia, or South America and Asia, no way in the last couple million years, 100 million years, have they really contacted each other. Yeah. Yet they're doing it somehow. So yeah, research is, it's interesting, and that'll all answer the questions as to why we're here, and why we all feel this way, and why depression is kind of a big part of our society.
Has been. Looks like it's slightly increasing, but I don't know. It's hard to say. Something like autism is much more obvious in terms of its prevalence increasing. I think ADHD too. A lot of people argue about overdiagnosis there, but the rates are just too explosive for overdiagnosis to account for that, I believe.
Do you think, with autism, well, actually, I wanted to ask you why you said prevalence is and this could go over the same with depression, and I think I kind of was going towards this path earlier when I lost track of what I was saying. Are depression rates rising right now, or is it that this could just be a question even for like me, I'm trying to think now, but like as we're getting older, we're just noticing it more.
Yeah.
And our diagnoses are getting better. Same with autism. I've read that, people who are autistic or on the autistic spectrum may not have been changing over time. It may not necessarily be getting worse, but our methods of diagnosing it are different.
Yeah.
And we're understanding that there's different on the spectrum of autism. We're taking away Asperger's and putting that into the autistic spectrum. So
right. My guess is that it's both. I think that's not too controversial, right? Like, we are more sensitive to picking up on psychiatric illness in people, but the increase in prevalence in autism is explosive. Like I was saying earlier, there's just no way that that's due to increased detection for it. My guess is that,
and that's been with research and showed statistically that that's what they think.
I don't have a meta-analysis in my mind.
Also, like, vaccines have been going up, and like I'm just kidding. I'm not going to be that troll. So the not vaccines, autism. So there has, for sure, it is rising. Not rising.
I would feel more confident saying that with a 20-second Google search, but I'm fairly confident that if we did that, there's probably overwhelming evidence that it's rising.
We could do a Google search. I know I've heard that and read that multiple times, that they think it is rising, not just from diagnosis, and we're noticing it more. Yeah. It seems that there is a trend with, I don't know what could be causing that in our genetics or our environment.
There's a lot
inflicting that on us, changing our genetics, or
there's probably a lot of things going on is the easy answer.
Yeah.
And people are having kids later. that's correlated with autism prevalence, having kids at an older age. Used to just be for women. I think it's men too now.
Really?
Yeah.
So like a 50-year-old, like this 50-year-old man and a 20-year-old woman getting pregnant, there's still a rise in
versus two 20-year-olds.
Two 20-year-olds.
I believe so.
Really? And so it's just a whole. That's the thing with research. It's like you can't always nail it down to one thing.
Yeah.
And that's why you're saying correlation can't equal causation all the time, because
you have to be very agnostic.
Yeah.
It's very easy to get wrapped up and excited about findings and go off of those, but
and have to be very just empirical in your data.
I mean, it's supposed to be, and it isn't close to being this, but like the one place in society where we truly have objectivism, and that's certainly not the case. But I do think it's a little bit better than other places where we're much more subjective in how we generate our conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something I think is worth defending, and if that means I have to be really boring in what I conclude, it's a small price to pay for the type of rationality that I think a culture like that can promote.
Yeah. No, and that, I mean, that is good with research, that you can't always just jump to a conclusion.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's just we did the study and we saw that there's some correlation, but I can't definitively say that that's it.
Yeah.
And that's the issue too now with when you read articles on Facebook and stuff, just the titles of articles, they're like, red meat causes cancer. You're just like, hold on. If you actually read the data, and it's like, well, what else was not what else did not stay as a constant in the trial?
Media can just be poisonous to our understanding of our world around us in a comprehensive manner, I think.
Yeah.
I don't think that's even a controversial point either.
Yeah,
There's lots of examples of that.
So what else? You said you mentioned autism rising. What else did you say? Like with like depression? We were getting back to depression rising in society.
There is another condition that I listed. I think autism's the most obvious example, but I think the argument's there for ADHD. Certainly the rates are.
Yeah.
There's going to be more people who are skeptical. People are skeptical of ADD and ADHD diagnoses. I don't know if that's entirely justified. I think people are, because they see cultural changes, like kids always having smartphones and things like that. But again, I think like the increases in that are beyond what we can attribute to just being more sensitive to detecting when kids have those types of symptoms. So that and autism, I think, probably have faster rates of increase than something like depression by a wide margin.
With ADHD, I mean, I would say as a kid, I was diagnosed with it. I have ADD, like for sure. Like just talking to me right now, I'll go off on a tangent and have no clue what I'm doing. But ADHD, like I'm always tapping on stuff. I'm always moving around, just thinking, like have songs going on in my head. And with having smartphones and distractions, what in any research you've read showing smartphones being in our faces at all times, just having blue light just fucking sitting there, just like, so that you think definitely has a correlation between the rises of certain mental disorders, I would say, or mental.
It's not my field, but there's a lot of research right now out on what they call screen time, and that's included in actually the data set that I'm primarily going to be looking into has like metrics for screen time. A lot of people do psychology research on that. I assume there have been significant negative associations with screen time, given the fact that people are still publishing on it, but can't really speak to it too much.
Yeah, I like that you're careful with what you say. So usually I just go off. I'm like, all right, that's what's happening. But no, it's good to be like, yeah, I don't know. And that's actually something that like, as you get older, I remember as a kid or in high school, I thought I knew everything. Yeah. And when I was a freshman or sophomore in college, I would always like, if you'd see someone like on the quad, like with like one of those signs that like God hates fags, like stuff like that. I used to argue and stuff all the time and like get in people's faces, or like people would like in class be arguing something political or just having a conversation about anything, whatever topic you could think of that's controversial. Now that I'm like older and 25, 26, it's like I realize like, wow, I have way more questions every time I ask a question, and in the process of answering it, I get 5 more questions that I don't know. And now it's like as we're older, you realize like I don't know shit.
Trying to learn is humbling, huh?
It is, yeah. It's like, I agree. Yeah, it's like you're like, I don't know shit, because every time you answer one thing, you have 4 more questions off that.
Yeah,
and you'll never know. So it is definitely humbling.
I'm in the same boat. Yeah.
That you don't know everything, and that's where you stem from with your research. You're like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't really know.
It's really muddy, dude.
Yeah.
It's really murky waters trying to tread through there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I wanted you on just to talk about, since depression is a very big topic right now in our society. And it's stigmatized less now.
Yeah.
People are more willing to talk about it and try to answer where it comes from. Why does it seem that it's such a prevalent disorder right now?
Yeah. Where it still seems like it's not really benefiting a lot is in older populations. In geriatric populations, depression is incredibly rampant, but they don't have the same types of cultural shifts that we do. That would be my assumption, at least from what I've seen.
Cultural shifts as in?
Like, we have this exposure to all these ideas that depression should be more talked about, mood disorder should be more talked about. I bet you someone over like 70, like most in this country, have probably heard the phrase neurotypical or something like that. We get to benefit from being on like a wave of acceptance that's kind of come across our country since when? Like, it feels like the early 2000s to like 2015. Yeah. A cutoff there in the other direction. But
we're talking about
general acceptance of people and individual differences in people, whether that's ethnic groups or mental states or lifestyle choices. And then you think around
2015, 2016, we went down.
Yeah, there's a little backswing to that, huh?
I wonder why.
Yeah, I mean, I think people push too hard in one direction, and like it's a very small group of people that push too hard, but it's the ones that got all the media attention.
I was kind of joking with like, I wonder why, because then you look at what happened in 2016. But yeah, no, I agree. If you push too hard with like a liberal or conservative agenda, then there's a backlash where people go, that's fucking batshit crazy, and it pushes you to one side.
Yeah,
I agree.
Right. Which is unfortunate, but it's probably happened before, and we're probably going to swing back, I think, here after a little bit of a slightly more conservative period.
History always repeats itself.
Yeah, there's a lot of instances of that.
But with the geriatric community, so that's not addressed as much.
No, absolutely not. I think largely because those populations are less likely to complain. Their voices aren't often heard very well either. You think of like the typical, like, in a nursing home, family isn't super attentive type of adult, maybe not someone who's actively engaged with their family all the time. You're talking about someone who's at an incredible risk for depression. As soon as you start to take any organism's autonomy away, any mammal, as far as I know, they really are at risk. And that's something that kids get, teenagers get. It's part of the reason. It's like the shock paradigm I was talking about for mice, where they take their sense of control over their environment away. And that's what you see in a nursing home, right? And there's all kinds of physiological stuff going on, like inflammatory compounds, cell-signaling molecules that are associated with depressive symptoms that start to become more rampant with things like rheumatoid arthritis or other inflammatory chronic conditions. And you really have a perfect storm of someone who doesn't necessarily have the immediate social support they need, is more isolated socially than they're used to, which is also predictive of mood disorders, and someone who feels like they're not empowered to make changes in their life because they're too old. And they may be right sometimes, which is very sad to think about, but it's certainly rampant in those communities and more underreported there, I would assume.
Wow. You know what? Coming into this, I didn't even really think about that.
Yeah, visit your grandparents if you haven't. That's listening.
I unfortunately do not have any more grandparents.
If you're lucky enough to have them. Yeah. I'm sorry to hear that.
But I mean, if there are any grandparents out there, that's definitely, and anyone that's out there maybe listening, definitely be aware of that. I didn't even think about that. Maybe that's my own selfish ignorance mind.
And people think about their immediate surroundings.
Yeah, true. Yeah. That's very sad when you put it that way.
Yeah, it's like very sad.
Making the correlation to the mice taking away autonomy and then as an older age.
Yeah, you get put in a bed, you can't feed yourself properly. Like, that would just crush me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just simply like, once you get to the stage where like for example, when my Bob and my grandma, we took away her car keys, took away her car and stuff. And then once you get to that stage, and then you start thinking like, oh, like I lost that, what else am I losing? Yeah. Then especially too if you're dealing with dementia. Yeah. And now there's other disorders come in where mental stuff where you start getting paranoid. People are doing stuff to you. Like, why? It's sad. It's we had to go down that route with my grandma, and
I think that's pretty typical, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's very typical, and definitely something that I haven't even thought about that for a while. That's very sad and weird. Yeah. Sad. It's interesting. And then, with depression in old age, another weird place depression comes in that I find this interesting, like dealing with hormonal, is, with bringing in life to this world. You think that's something that's a very, very important, pivotal moment.
Yeah.
Yet some people deal very negatively with that. And it affects them a lot, which I'm talking about postpartum depression. The reason I think about that a lot, and I know about it a lot, is I have someone here that deals a lot with bringing in these babies into this world. And she's talked about it. Her name's Olivia. She's right over there. Hey, Olivia. Hey. Hi. And that's, dealing with, part of looking at evolutionary wise, we talked about, like, why would depression even exist in us? Why would that be, something that over time you'd think that'd be something that continuing genetics, continuing on. Why would that want to manifest itself? And have we self-corrected that by coming into tribes and coming out net positive? Yet such a pivotal moment, especially with females. I think it's 1 in 3 females throughout. Well, 1 in 3 females. That's 1 in 15 or so adults deal with clinical depression throughout their entire lives. 1 in 10 adults come across depression in their lives at some point, more than just a grieving process. It's a true depressive symptoms. And then it's 1 in 6 women. 1 in 6 women deal with depression, and 1 in 3, or no, it is actually 1 in 3 women at some point in their lifetime deal with depression. Depression is more prevalent in women. Yep. Which I find that with all the stuff women have to deal with, that's definitely strange. And then dealing with bringing a new child in, why that would all of a sudden just bring you down as a person when you have to bring this new human into the world, this thing that you created, and then all of a sudden you just completely fall apart yourself.
Needs more study.
Yeah,
for sure.
Definitely needs more study. And I could bring someone else in here to talk about that if she feels like that. Do you want to? Yeah, sure. Come on. So everyone, this is Olivia. She is my lovely girlfriend, and she does labor and delivery. So she pops those little babies out, which I find incredibly fascinating. And like I've always said to you, whenever you have a moment where you feel like, oh man, like I'm not really doing anything with my life or anything, it's like, you're doing the number one most important job in all of society. To some extent. You're keeping this whole entire train going by popping those babies out and allowing them to live. So I'm going to give off the mic to you really quick, and then I'd say afterwards we can wrap it up, since we've already hit an hour and 23 minutes, believe it or not.
Nice.
So yeah.
Goes by quick.
Yeah, Olivia, here we go. Take it away.
Oh, I have to wear these.
Get the hair. Wear one of those.
Okay. I don't know. Oh, I can hear myself.
Oh, and yeah, sorry if your voice sounds weird. It's something you always have to get used to.
That's such a cool job. That's got to be very satisfying at the end of the day. Even if the day is rough, maybe the end of the week more so. But
for sure, especially about this week. Like, I worked 16 hours on Thanksgiving, and a shift I had on Monday was a tough one. Yeah. So I definitely just go home thinking about the things that I see and about my patients. And I had a nightmare about one this past week. So I definitely get wrapped up into it, and it's it's an interesting job. It's something that I'm passionate about and wonder about, am I in the right field? Am I doing what I should be doing? And then I, have an experience with a patient, and then that totally brings me back to why I'm doing exactly what I'm doing. So
very awesome. Few are as directly on the ground helping people to that degree, right? Where they get to see that firsthand to that extent. That's got to be wild. Cool. I'd be interested to hear what you think you've learned about I don't know, the reproductive process. It's kind of interesting to be at that defining moment of it.
Exactly. So I think that one of the biggest things is that it is a defining moment. So it could be your 5th child. It doesn't even matter. It's still, people have expectations. So we one thing that I do is the admission process. So the time that they get there and are going to be induced, or if they're in labor, and then even up until discharge. So we do labor, delivery, recovery, and postpartum. So we do everything on our unit. So we do a lot. But Yeah, so even from like admission, we actually do start to ask questions. We go through a postpartum or perinatal depression scale. Oh. So we already go through like 15 questions. Like, are you able to laugh and see the funny side of things? And it's actually like imprinted in my mind. I could probably go through most of it just like right now. But so from the time that they get there, we go through that, or we ask about history of anxiety, history of mental illness, even like abuse. So just like domestic abuse. Yeah. And all of those things put you at a higher risk. So
I'm sure.
Yeah, just down to like the admission process, I'll address those issues and then kind of warn women and try to normalize it for them right off the bat. Yeah, that you probably will experience really? Postpartum depression. I really do. Yeah. So even if it is just like the postpartum blues, which is up to 2 weeks, if it's anything past 2 weeks, that's something that needs to be treated. So my job is really not to treat it because it's postpartum and I only have them for like 48 hours afterwards.
Right.
So
it sounds like, sorry, keep going.
My job is more to like normalize it for them before it even happens. So even in front of like their families and their husbands and boyfriends and everything, just to normalize it and say you're gonna feel down, you're gonna feel overwhelmed. So I ask like who in this room is gonna be your support system? Who can you call? If you're having trouble breastfeeding, or do you have friends that have breastfed? And because that's a big deal as well, just like that bonding process. So my job is to normalize it and to kind of let them know like the warning signs.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I take that upon myself to kind of delve deeper than just like the perinatal depression scale and to really like help them already start to be aware of the things that are going to happen postpartum. So, and then on the discharge process, it's if you do feel overwhelmed or if you do stay up late crying and unable to take care of your baby, then that's the point, like when you need to contact your doctor if you're unable to take care of yourself or your baby. So
I like how you prime the social support too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like have them in the room and make sure like they're stepping up to the plate, taking responsibility for that. Definitely. It's incredibly important.
Yeah. I agree. The one question that it is hard having like the social support in the room is asking like the domestic abuse question. Like you can't really ask that question with people in the room. Right. So it's kind of the balance of it's good to have like their support people in the room because they're a part of this obviously as much as like the woman is. But yeah, it's also kind of hard to delve into those social issues. So
I think a lot of clinicians probably struggle with that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. We do have them more long term, so we have patients alone in the room a lot more than other like EDs or situations like that. So, but, yeah, I know.
So you said the onset of postpartum depression tends to be like 2 weeks is kind of the cutoff where it goes from like normal process to baby something blues, where you need like additional medical attention.
Yeah.
How about like the initiation of it? Is that like within 12 hours when they give birth, or is that like way quicker?
It's really interesting. So postpartum depression, it can actually start during like the later half of, or not half, but like towards the end of the pregnancy is when you can start to kind of see like the overwhelming, the sadness, and then that's why we say perinatal depression scale.
Yeah.
So they'll already kind of be up late at night, like crying and unable to like really think through like their coping mechanisms and everything. So we already begin to go through that scale with them. And then after delivery, it can be up until like a year that they can start to actually like develop it. So and that kind of goes along with like social issues as well. Like if a spouse like loses their job during that time, then you can all of a sudden dip into a postpartum depression because you were already on the brink of it because you're postpartum. Especially moms who are like still breastfeeding and everything. You still have just like these incredible like turbulent hormones in your body. It's incredible. So typically progesterone is the hormone that they associate with mood disorders postpartum.
So do they ever put like mothers on like birth control to like try and control progesterone or something like that? I know there are mechanisms out there for fluctuating
not
progesterone.
That I know of. I've not heard of using of birth control for that. But because it is a big dip in progesterone as soon as the placenta is delivered, so possibly a birth control would help. I don't know how that would affect like breastfeeding and everything else if someone wanted to do that. But yeah, that's a really good question.
I mean, I don't know. It just seems like there's limited mechanisms that we use to change female hormone balances.
Yeah,
that's like probably the most tried and true one, at least.
Yeah, for sure. But no, that's a really good question. It's typically just like SSRIs or even just like talk therapy groups. Like we have groups for like postpartum depression, and
that's great.
Just like support groups from others. So all of those things paired together on top of social support. For sure.
It's amazing how like many things are predicted by lack of social support. And I guess if you can do so much with a better social support system, then it doesn't necessarily make sense to intervene with pharmaceuticals immediately, at least if you have that other option, although I'm sure there are people that need more than just the social support.
Agreed. And that is unfortunate. If you could just fix things with emotional support or with with social contact, then we could avoid so much. And actually, one really quick topic, I think this is so interesting. So babies who are withdrawing from like opioid abuse or anything like that. So babies who are going to be like withdrawing in our NICU for up to 2 weeks. There are recent studies on that, and I think this is so interesting. So we typically put the babies on morphine to kind of help with the withdrawal symptoms. So they'll be on a dosage of morphine, just like an oral dosage of it, and it is like slowly weaned down depending on their irritability. So it's typically irritability and like feeding, and but there have been studies that show that babies who are pretty much just cuddled all the time do not have to be put on morphine.
That's so cool.
It's so crazy. So I really look forward to possibly having like just like baby cuddlers come into our unit more like 24/7 and give those babies like the attention that they need, because we can only do so much. Like we have labor patients, we have so much to do, so it's hard to give them everything that they need. But I thought that was really cool.
That is. What is like one of the more mysterious aspects of perinatal depression or postpartum depression to you?
One of the most mysterious aspects?
I guess like what you're most curious about is kind of always something that I'm interested about for people who practice on the ground work, is like where they would like to see developments or what in their experience has really like raised more questions than answers. I mean, it's almost fairly predictable, I feel like. Really?
Because people with like people have a history of postpartum depression. That's in their charts. We ask them if they have a history of anxiety, depression, bipolar, anything like that. And that just like sets them up for failure almost, you know what I mean? And not failure, but just
they're more vulnerable.
They're just a lot more vulnerable individuals. So I feel like it's almost I don't know, I feel like it's fairly predictable of something. And then people postpartum, they're exhausted, they're so tired, and they're going to be irritable, like they're snapping at people left and right, and then they apologize, and it's just there's so much going on, and it's I feel like it's fairly predictable. So I think I feel the importance of just like normalizing it for them, letting them understand. But treatment, I think treatment would be a good, like you said, progesterone, just replacing that progesterone. I don't really get to see the treatment side, obviously. That's more of the obstetricians and midwives treating it postpartum. But
I mean, you have a good point about like the treatment is where there's more room for development if the mechanism isn't necessarily completely figured out, but if it's predictable, like what you're saying, that's a lot more than a lot of psychiatric conditions can tout about their statistics. So,
and just because it's so common, because it is common,
right? Yeah.
Which I find is so sad. That's so common.
It is. Oh, it's incredibly sad.
Like you're doing this like huge. Your body's going through so much. I mean, it makes sense that it can happen, but your body's going through so much, bringing life in, and then all of a sudden your brain just doesn't.
It fights you. Yeah. It does. Yeah. Especially traumatic births. When you go through a traumatic birth, that even because that happens. Like there's obstetric emergencies. You're all of a sudden trying to deliver your baby, you're going through 12 hours of labor and you're exhausted, then all of a sudden they drag you back into an OR and like cut open your belly. Like, what is this? So there's all kinds of obstetric emergencies that cause PTSD in women.
Wow.
That's true. So, and that sets you up for postpartum depression.
Yeah, I'm sure subsequent times also, if they give birth after that. That's crazy. I guess I hadn't put myself in the shoes of someone giving birth, which I'm sure many men would say.
And I didn't until I had to help people, go through it.
Yeah, but to go to the operating room on top of all that stress that you have and thinking that you're close to being done and then having to weigh all of the ramifications of surgery all at once in that state.
Just for yourself.
Wow.
We had one mom she had to go to a C-section, which isn't terribly uncommon, but this was on Thanksgiving, and that was the night that I worked 16, but she was terrified. She was crying. We gave her a little bit of like fentanyl just to calm her down and like help with pain. And one thing that I did was I ran into like our nursery and found a little hat, because we have women that donate like knit hats that they handmade, and a couple of them, or they made a couple of little like turkey ones. So I ran and got one real quick, and she was like signing consents and everything, and I was like, look at this turkey hat real quick before you go, because I'm gonna put this on your baby before I go home. It's gonna be so cute. So I don't know, I felt good like doing just like small things like that, just getting them excited.
I think having a personal touch to any type of medical environment is appreciated much more than I would. I'm sure that went very appreciated.
I hope so. I hope so. But so postpartum depression, it not only affects the mom and the families, but also like the baby long term. Like you were saying, like childhood development, if there's no like bonding between a mom and a baby, like that brain development is not going to be 100%. It's not going to be what it could be if the mom was, what she normally is able to do. So I think that's also a big long-term effect of postpartum depression, is just how it affects children. And if we can treat postpartum depression, we can hopefully treat like long-term effects on the children. If
we have better kids growing up, then that has pretty big implications.
And then decrease their risk of postpartum depression, and then decrease the whole chain of events. But so I do my best with my acute care setting.
It sounds like it.
I
mean, I hope it goes without saying that people who are in your kinds of position, nurses, whatever, are not thanked enough in what you do. I mean, that's like who works like 16 hours on Thanksgiving, right? Besides people who have like a deep personal stake.
I picked up. We make holiday pay, so I don't know. And not a lot of like the moms who are actually going to be like cooking, like wanted to pick up. So I don't know. I thought I'd do it. Be nice. Brownie points to my coworkers.
Yeah.
I kiss ass sometimes. It is what it is. But okay, that's all I got.
Oh, okay.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, of course. Here.
Thank you. And thank you for coming on. I'm just kind of calling you in there, calling you out right there.
Okay.
One of these days I'm going to have you on just to talk about maybe your job more, because you go through ridiculous amounts of just weird stories you've told me. Gosh. You'd think too, as part of like the evolutionary stage, like why, there's debates on why it's so hard for humans to give birth, like the brain vaginal canal and your skull cavity going through but
it seems like they've increased in size as nutrition has increased in size as we're eating more.
So that definitely very interesting. And what you do is nuts. I can't do it. You always say like, your job's cool, you're an engineer and stuff. I'm like, dude, you're popping babies out of vaginas and people are screaming and yelling, and I can't do that. To me that's beyond ridiculous. But thank you again for coming on, seriously. So we've hit an hour and 40 minutes right on the dot. What do you think? You want to wrap it up? Kind of just
your show,
call it. Hey, I mean, I guess as we've learned, ADD is on the rise, and going through an hour and 38 minutes, not an hour 40, that's a lot for people to handle usually.
You don't give out Adderall with your viewerships?
No, unfortunately I don't, but god damn, is that a good idea. Oh wow. And I'm going to jail now. So again, do you have anything last words with your research, depression, anything with tell the audience or views, plug anything that you like, I think?
Yeah, I have a Twitter. We're supposed to get followers on that. That's supposed to be a good thing for scientists. I'm like very much the 65-plus-year-old in that sphere, and I'm a little clueless at the moment. But just going to take this opportunity to whore myself out a little bit. But just in general, be skeptical of like psychiatric, psychological findings that you read. There's a lot of reason to be. So there's going to be advances, but like don't always believe people like me coming onto your friend's podcast and spouting shit off, or even like news outlets that are reporting things. Like it's a lot to piece apart. We're going to be very busy for a very long time to understand what's going on in our heads. And beyond that, I mean, it looks like it's not an independent system, the brain that is, in any way. So
yeah,
be skeptical. That's it.
Be skeptical. Well, I will say one thing is being skeptical from an article that's trending on Facebook or something with a title that just says, like, we what is it? Red meat causes cancer. Then ever you see all of your vegan, vegetarian friends are like, this is what I've been saying this whole time. Right. It's like, then well, look at the study. There might be some things you can pick apart in that study that may not be exactly true.
Right.
But I think having a long form conversation like this, you do get to have more time to talk about your ideas and bring them through. Or maybe you do have an idea and you start talking. And I've had this happen before. I start like saying something. I'm like, wait, no, actually that doesn't make sense. Like if I boil it down from my first initial sentence, then I start talking more and more. I'm like, wait, hold on. Actually, I just made myself a known hypocrite of myself. Like
it's a lot.
You find yourself doing that. But yeah, I agree.
Trying to construct a long cohesive argument is no small deal. It's no wonder that we run into inconsistencies and do a bunch of like cover up techniques. Everyone does that. Highest level of government, science, whatever. So there's a lot of bullshit floating out there.
Yeah. And being able to do this, I think definitely.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's nice to be able to talk about science in a slightly different context and be able to see like how applicable is to this to someone who's interested in this topic but hasn't necessarily like had their primary source of income tied into reading these papers and like doing these types of studies. So the public forum's a good one. Yeah. We should interact with it more.
Absolutely. And I learned a lot. I think hopefully people listening learn something, or just learn something about what your field of study is or anything that we talked about. I want to thank you for coming on and giving your time on this earth, a little time that we all have taken left to come on here and speak about what you do.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you, man.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you guys next time. Bye.